So without further ado, we want to go ahead and introduce our presenter for today, Avi Kreitschmann. We hope you all enjoy the presentation. Take it away, Avi.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully, what you'll get out of this is how to look at applying SBIRT, which has been used all over the country, and I helped implement it 2 times for 2 5-year grants in New Mexico. And this was in a variety of sites, including school-based health centers. And SBIRT is a framework for service delivery. It's not particularly an intervention in and of itself. And the acronym stands for screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment. What we're going to go through today is to look at, well, first of all, no financial relationship to the program. This is a little bit more about me. So let's talk about the objectives. At the end of the presentation, I hope that you'll have an overall view of SBIRT and that you'll be able to look at how this process will facilitate your ability to take care of youth at risk. And even though we're focusing today on suicidality, this is really looking at youth at risk for any kind of risky behavior, which can be substance misuse and abuse. It can be disruptive behavior, aggression towards other people, self-harm, etc. And then one of the things I really want to emphasize is that overall, my philosophy is strength-based and resiliency-based and solution-focused, as opposed to pathology and deficit-based. And also, in all the treatments that I look at, is how to involve the community of support that people have. And for youth, that's their peers. So all the therapies that we'll be talking about is how to involve and identify peer supports that support safety, security, recovery, and how to deal with challenges of identifying people who don't support the best kind of health outcomes for the folks that we're trying to be of service to, and especially looking at the benefits of involving youth peers, peer advocates, support workers as part of the team. And one of the things I'm really proud about is in New Mexico, in the second 5-year grant that we had, I incorporated peer support workers to have essential SBIRT functions. And we trained the peer support workers in exactly the same interventions that we trained the counselors and social workers. And we also looked at outcomes. And for a particular form of evidence-based treatment called seeking safety, which I also give trainings on, some of you hopefully have joined me for those, that we found that the outcomes were better for the clients, the consumers, the patients, from seeking safety that was administered by peer support workers than counselors and social workers. A big part of that was engagement and involvement in the treatment. So a brief piece of ASPIRE. ASPIRE is Alliance Building for Suicide Prevention and Youth Resilience. This is through a Garrett Lee Smith suicide prevention grant with the Department of Health and the Office of School and Adolescent Health being the principal investigators from the state. And we have these different aspects: coalition building, we have a youth advisory council and adults who support that. We also have, as part of our planning committee and our implementation committee, peer support workers who work throughout the state. We offer clinical trainings, and in the pre-COVID days, they were on site. Now they're all, of course, video conferencing. And we also do video conferencing as well to supplement the on-sites that we have. One of our on-sites, we were offering about a half a dozen or more, I believe, presentations, probably was closer to a dozen at head to toe. And a lot of these we've been able to do through virtual head to toe through webinars. This is one of them. And then we also are looking at community crisis response and recovery teams. We've had the good fortune of being contacted by a number of rural and frontier and remote areas of the state who have difficulties with youth suicidality, including suicide contagion and clusters. And we have assembled everybody, including mayor's office, police, fire, school districts, behavioral health, freestanding agencies, primary care settings, to create a system of care. And those have really taken off in about a half a dozen communities. And we really very much love that work and want to continue it. So where I'd like to start is that there's this perception out there that a lot of people feel hopeless about suicide in the general public and feel if somebody is wanting to kill themselves, they will, and they'll do it repeatedly until they, quote, succeed, which is a horrible way of thinking about it, but end their life. And also that there's nothing they can do. And there's this wonderful poll that was administered to thousands of people through many states in different populations on behalf of a number of suicide prevention agencies. And they found that 94%, which is like stunning, believe that suicide can be prevented. And the same group of people, the vast majority of people, said if they knew that someone close to them was suffering, they would want to be helpful. They would want to personally take action. So that's where I look at for all of us, instead of focusing solely on people who are referred to us as behavioral health professionals or primary care, physicians, nurses, PAs, peer support workers, community support workers, we want to look at this wealth of resources in the community. And the best way that we can be of help to people is public health preventative initiatives. So that's what we're going to talk about as well. Oops. So I also like to start in all the presentations that I have, not for professionals, but also for the general public, about a lot of myths that go around. And the reason it's important to dispel these myths is because it does engender hopelessness, both for the people who are dealing with self-harmful feelings and impulses and behaviors, but also all the people who care about them. So someone is really suicidal, they're probably going to kill themselves at some point, no matter what you do. If you ask a depressed person about suicide, you're going to put the idea in their heads where they never had it before. There's no point in asking about suicidal thoughts. If someone's going to do it, they won't tell you. Someone making suicidal threats won't really do it. They're looking for attention. If you stop someone from killing themselves one way, they'll probably find another. So let's take these briefly one by one. They're all totally false, right? And this is based on an experience in multiple countries with literally millions of people. So if someone is suicidal, they're probably going to kill themselves at some point, no matter what you do. What we find is that the vast majority of people who make a life-threatening suicide attempt and survive never make another lethal attempt after that. And in some cases, they don't make any attempts after that. It's a very small group of people. The classic population is actually the elderly who have melancholic features of major depressive disorder with psychotic features. That's chronic, so the most severe form of depression. And they're also that population who won't tell you about it, And the way that I connect it is I've had the privilege of working with terminally ill kids for close to 40 years. And a lot of these children, like a lot of adults with cancer, they're in terrible agony and pain. And so they only think about suicide, or in this case, euthanasia, as a way of ending that suffering. And it's only people typically who have this lifelong severe depression, and everything's been tried, all sorts of medication, talk therapies, etc. And they're legitimately hopeless about getting better. That's the small group of people who really want to die, don't tell the professionals that they are making those plans, and repeat until they end their life. But the vast majority don't do that. The second one is really toxic. If you ask somebody about suicide, you're somehow seducing them or hypnotically implanting in their mind that they're suicidal. The reason that's so toxic is because that prevents us from doing any kind of screening or assessment. And the fact of the matter is totally the opposite. That, first of all, for teenagers, the majority have vague, indeterminate thoughts of life sucks, I don't want to wake up tomorrow, I wonder how I can cope with that, maybe I should end my life. No determination, no intent, no rehearsals, no behavior, no preparation. So they're suicidal in vague ideas, very low risk. That's very common. And most of them are relieved when people listen to them and help them talk about their risk. There's very little evidence that someone who is never remotely self-harmful or suicidal in the most indefinite kind of way, that if you ask the question, all of a sudden they go, oh yeah, that's something I need to do. But a lot of parents have that belief, teachers have that belief, some of us have that belief. And so that prevents us from doing screening or asking about it. And what we find is that it's really important to talk about those kinds of issues, because people who are struggling with it, and all of us are ambivalent no matter what's going on, and the true meaning of ambivalence is we have mixed feelings. So a lot of us will feel momentarily hopeless, helpless, worthless. And it's really relieving to talk about that and to put it into context. And to have someone who says, oh, you know, that happens to a lot of people. And here's the way that you can cope with it. Let's figure out when you feel more hopeful and when you are more stressed, and how we can deal with those stressors. And like I said, the idea that if you talk about it, people are going to withhold it from you. The second part there that we haven't talked about yet, someone making threats won't really do it, they're looking for attention. And my standard line to that is, we're all looking for attention. When we think about attachment, what are we saying is, listen to me, hear me, attend to me, take care of me. That's how we relate to each other. You're all attending to yourself, hopefully by attending here. And I'm wanting you to attend to me, and hopefully what I can inspire you to do day after day. We do great harm when we label people's genuine conversations as attention-seeking, manipulative, suicidal, quote, gestures. If one of the things that I'm really big on is using terms that are harmful to the work that we do as opposed to helpful. So if you can eliminate all those kinds of phrases, that would be great. While I'm at it, another thing that I would like you to look at is the whole idea about resistance, non-compliance, defiance, non-adherence to plans. And the reason for that is, if you really want to be collaborative egalitarian, transparent, and supporting people's own agency and resilience and safety, right? Then if you say, if you don't listen to me and you don't follow exactly what I say, then you're resisting me and you're wrong and you're going to hurt yourself. What that's saying is, you know best and they don't. You're the authority on their life and they're not. You know better than they do, and they know less than you do about themselves. So think of how we relate to people. And again, there's a wealth of literature that very, very, very few people. So there's a study, for instance, of the Golden Gate Bridge and the people who jump. Most people who jump don't survive the jump, but the people who have survived, 95% of those people say, thank God I survived, and I'm never going to try this again. There's one famous person who made a beautiful video about that experience and has become a suicide prevention specialist. So it's highly unlikely that if somebody makes a suicide attempt that's life-threatening, that they'll say, oh, it didn't answer what I needed. I need to do it until I die. Like I said, that's a very small group of people. So if you could dispel those myths, that would be terrific. I'm not going to belabor what a suicide attempt is. You all know that. So I'm going to move quickly into the Columbia scale, which is an evidence-based practice of looking at how do I assess suicidality? How do I tease out about thoughts, plans, behavior, and intent? And this has been normed for school-age children as well as adolescents and young adults. So I'm going to give you suggestions of sample questions that you can ask pretty much from first and second grade on. You know, one thing you have to be mindful of, and I'm sure that all of you are, for the youngest kids, they don't have an understanding of the permanence of death. You know, a lot of them think that when people sort of die, they're just asleep and they could wake up. They worry about people who are buried or in coffins, that they might wake up. They're not really in any way contemplating suicide. We're really talking about maybe third, fourth, fifth grade plus, when they have some idea of the permanence of death and some idea of the consequences of self-harmful behavior. So when we're looking at ideas and thoughts, we're looking at frequency, intensity, and duration. So how often does it happen? How intense is it when it happens? And how long that intensity lasts. When we're looking at planning, we're looking at timing, location, lethality of method, availability, and preparation. When we're looking at behaviors, we're looking at past attempts, aborted versus interrupted attempts. Now, an aborted attempt means that I decide I don't want to take any more pills, or I decide after cutting myself, I need to stop. So I've made that decision. Interrupted attempts is when somebody stumbles on me while I'm taking the pills and say, Avi, don't do that. Now, the thing that we have to be mindful of is, if I wanted to think about killing myself, and I know that the other people in my family are going to be here from 6 o'clock on, and I start to take the pills at 5:45, in some way, I'm planning an aborted attempt, even though somebody else is stopping me, right? So one of the things we have to consider is how much is the intent when people are planning their attempt, where no one will be around to rescue them if they go through with it. So for example, I had one experience recently where I was meeting with counselors at a school, and they had their first on-site attempt at the school for over a decade. And I was there and I helped them do the assessment, et cetera. And I, underscored the fact that this youth chose to do it when school was in session. This was before home sheltering, when everybody was around, so they could easily be found. So that tells us that the intent was different than if they went to a faraway, distant place, nobody knew about it, nobody could discover them, and they did the same thing. And then as far as intent, the level in which the person is going to carry out the attempt, and then their belief that the plan is lethal or self-injurious. Here's another point from my practice, is that a lot of times we're dismissive of an attempt because we say, oh, they were only taking 3 Tylenol, there was 100 in the bottle. If they, quote, really wanted to die, they would have taken the whole bottle. But what we don't know is what that person believed, right? And it can go either way. So let's take sleeping pills, and you're a young teenager and you have difficulty sleeping, and they're one of your parents' pills, right? And you know that your parent takes 1 or 2. So you start with 2, not knowing that for you, that could be very harmful to you. You could go into respiratory depression, go into a coma. And then initially, within a half an hour, you feel a little bit sleepy, but you think you want to take more, so you take 3. You had no idea that it was of potential harm to you. You were just taking a sleeping pill or a pain pill. No suicidal intent. But could you be harmed by that? Yes. All right. Flip side, go back to the Tylenol. I know a lot of people, like with Tylenol, they know it's really harmful to the liver. So they go, well, the typical dose is 1 extra strength every 2 or 3 times a day, right? And so they'll say, okay, well then 3 or 4 is probably going to kill me. So that's why they take the 3 or 4. So their belief is that it's lethal, right? So in other words, we have to put ourselves in their head and their experience. We don't want to say in the first case, right, that they were suicidal when they weren't. They were engaging in risky behavior, but they didn't know the risk, right? It wasn't a suicide overdose. And in the other case that I mentioned, they were definitely suicidal. They just chose something with low lethality, but they believed or wished or hoped that it would really harm them, if not end their life. This is to say, for me, as a child psychiatrist, there's a lot of times when I've been in a situation where I'm the only child psychiatrist in 100 miles. So I see people who are really in dire straits. A lot of times they get a history, and the history is denies suicidal ideation, no risk. You can see how it's really important to go into these details, okay? So here are the 6 questions. Have you wished you were dead? Or, and this is best for younger children, wish you could go to sleep and not wake up. And another way that I phrase that is, have you had the experience, infrequently, relatively often, where you go like, I just don't want to face tomorrow. I just can't deal with it. I just wish I could not wake up, sleep indefinitely. You can see that on the continuum of suicidal ideation, that's very low. But a lot of people, if you say, especially younger ones, if you say, you wish you were dead, they don't even know exactly what you're meaning about that, right? So if you say, I just can't face things, in other words, I'm so hopeless and helpless that I don't know how to cope, that's what we're looking at. Then have you actually had any thoughts of killing yourself? In other words, it wouldn't sort of magically happen that you just couldn't wake up. or that you had this vague kind of wish that maybe you were dead and weren't alive, but you have thoughts that you're going to end your life. You can see how that's much more severe. Then, does it extend to details? Not just that you have this idea that life isn't worth living, and I don't find easily reasons to live, but now I'm thinking, maybe I'll take pills, maybe I'll blow my brains out, maybe I'll jump, maybe I'll hang myself, suffocate myself. So then we're beginning to think of method, right? The how. Have you had these thoughts and some intention of acting on them? So it's one thing, a lot of you know about the stages of change. So we have pre-contemplation, where you're not even beginning to think about something. Contemplation, when you're mulling it over. Then preparation, when you're starting to say, how do I put these feelings or these ideas into action? And then action, where I'm going to do something. So now we're getting to the idea of, not only am I thinking about this relatively frequently and intense, but how am I going to do it? And not just how might I do it, but should I do it? Will I do it? So the first part of it is thinking about what might I do? The next piece, unfortunately, is I think I might want to do that, or I will do that. And then have you started to work out the details of how to kill yourself? Do you intend to carry out this plan? So the details might be, okay, I'm going to take an overdose. I'm going back to the pain pills. I know a lot of people who either accidentally or intentionally take a lot of pain pills, opioids, and they never wake up, especially if people don't have Narcan around, right? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to steal Dad's OxyContin, and I'm going to hoard it and hope he doesn't notice it. And when nobody's around, I'm going to take him. So those are the kinds of details. I'm thinking about the method. I'm thinking about the where. I'm thinking about the when. I'm thinking about all those things. And then the more final piece is, have you rehearsed it? Have you ever done anything, start to do anything, prepared to do anything to end your life? So you're starting to plan in the fifth question, and in the sixth question, you're carrying out that plan to some extent. Does this all make sense? So you can see how we're building to risk. And we start with the vaguest kind of ideas. And as you would imagine, if they say, no, I've never even felt that hopeless. I really feel, yeah, I get demoralized sometimes. Yeah, I get down sometimes. But, I really want to face the next day. I have pretty decent friends. I like what I do. I enjoy dancing, sports, music, whatever it might be. So that's why it's in this kind of sequence. This is my own stuff, which I mentioned to you before. I really would encourage you to talk not about suicidality, but about risk, right? Because some risky behaviors with no conscious wish to die may result in death. Some risky behaviors with a conscious wish to die may not result in death. So in the first situation, I have the person who accidentally overdoses on sleeping pills, right? No conscious wish to die at all. So by our assessment, no suicidality, but they're at high risk for dying. The second situation is the opposite, right? They have a conscious wish to die, but it doesn't result in death because they thought that 4 Tylenol was going to kill them, and it didn't. Now, to be even more graphic about this, I often talk about, these are real cases, about a 5-year-old who's in a very chaotic home environment, with parents who have been both abusive and neglectful, and inadequate substitute guardianship. This little boy lived near the Big I in Albuquerque, so heavy interstate traffic, and could easily slip out of the home with nobody paying any attention and just walk in the middle of the interstate. Okay. No wish to die, just unsupervised, impulsive, maybe sad, maybe traumatized, but no conscious wish to die. That kid is at very high risk for dying. So on an assessment, no suicidality, high risk for dying. Then you have a 14-year-old girl with major depressive disorder, mild in severity, with rejection-sensitive, atypical features. So she looks good most of the time unless somebody discounts her, diminishes her, makes her feel bad. And in that moment, she feels really sort of desperate and contemplates suicide, maybe even has taken a few pills, maybe even superficially cuts herself, knowing that where she cuts herself and how little she does it, she's not going to die from it, that she's self-harmful. Now, on her assessment, we'll say that she's mild to moderate suicide risk, right? But who's more likely to die? The 5-year-old. So I would really like you in your assessments to clarify risk for death, risk for injury, as opposed to just focusing narrowly on suicide. That all makes sense? So self-injury without suicidal intent may often serve as a coping mechanism. And one of the great things that's happened in our field in the last decade plus is that it used to be that cutting was seen as equally problematic as suicide attempts, for instance, by overdose or hanging or trying to use a firearm. Hopefully it was not loaded, or they didn't know how to use it, because if you used it and it was loaded, it would be lethal. We understand that people who cut, oftentimes it's not suicidal in intent at all. It's for people who are severely traumatized, a way of grounding and centering them. For people who feel that they're out of control, a way of, especially people who've been sexually abused or physically abused, to say, I'm the boss of my body, not somebody else. For some people, it's a distraction technique. And one of the things I think about with that is a lot of you who are my age or a little bit younger or older might think about arthritis. And you've probably heard of capsaicin ointment. That's the stuff that's in chili peppers, and it gives you a burning sensation. And a lot of people get relief for their arthritis from that. It doesn't help the arthritis at all. It just gives you that burning sensation on your skin, which distracts you from the real pain that you're having. Cutting can do that for some people. So for some people, it's taking control of their body. For some people, it's pulling them out of being dissociated, derealizing, not knowing what's around them, depersonalizing, not knowing who they are. These are all sort of clinical tips. And the bottom line that I want to let you know is, if you just administer this Columbia scale for suicidality, you might be missing some people who are at real risk for self-harm, if not death. So now we're going to move to safety planning. And then we're going to talk about that in some detail. And then we'll talk about SBIRT and how to apply it all. Safety planning can be done for any risky behavior. And what I have here is a template that combines many different forms of safety planning. And this particular form has been well utilized for suicide prevention for youth, but also for risky substance abuse, risky sexual behavior. So recognizing the warning signs is the first step. I'm going to go step by step with you, but this is the overall framework. On my own coping, with a friend coping, telling someone coping, asking for help, and then, really critical, reducing the potential for use of lethal means, and then discussing the likelihood of the person using their safety plan, looking at all the obstacles and the barriers for them to carry out the safety plan, and then revising it depending on what works for them and what doesn't. So let's go into this step by step. Here's the template that you can use. What are some of those early thoughts, feelings, or behaviors that lead you into suicidal thinking? So this is really important. The warning signs are for that person, not for us. They're not signs and symptoms. This is so, and it varies from one person to the next. It might be, I can't sleep. And a big part of why I can't sleep is I have all these terrible thoughts in my head about how everybody hates me and I'm screwing up all my relationships. That's their warning signs, right? So what do they identify as saying, life is not going well, I'm getting into trouble? That's the way that I know I need to find a safer, more secure place. This is bad, right? If I find, for instance, that I've been sexually abused, and it seems somehow that I get attracted to people who are abusive of me, if I find that somebody is sort of sleazy and overly seductive, then I go like, well, that's, what happened to me before. That's exactly the kind of person who can misuse me. That's my warning sign, okay? I need to do something different. I need to put my safety plan into place. So the warning signs come from them. And the warning signs are red flags saying, danger. I'm getting into a bad situation. Then the next step is, like I said, on my own. What we want to start with all the time is constantly saying, this is a solution-focused, a strength-based focus. You already have some of the tools that you need, if not most of the tools. What we're going to talk about is how to embellish them, strengthen them, as opposed to, you have nothing. I have to supply them all to you. You're lacking, and I can fill you up. Or, I know best, and you know nothing. The whole point of this, again, is having them understand themselves to be a person with values and meaning in life and strengths and resources. And our job is to help them recognize their own strengths and support those strengths. So we start with all the things that they can do on their own that they don't depend on anybody else to do. And we give them some ideas to brainstorm with them what has worked in the past. So from solution focused, what are you doing in the past that you want to continue to do? And what are the things that you have done that you want to stop? So one of the key little phrases there is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And if whatever you're doing is making things worse, stop it and do something radically different, okay? Then the next piece, and again, we'll flesh this out, is, well, if that doesn't work, how can I involve someone to help me with those kinds of things? How do I distract myself, pull myself out of that dark space, right? How do I soothe myself, comfort myself? Who encourages me to go out in nature, be with my pets, connect to people who support me, do fun things that I always enjoy and look forward to? Then the next piece is, well, that hasn't worked for me. That coping, distraction, soothing kinds of stuff, either by myself or with other people, I could really use the benefit of Maria's wisdom. or Iris's, energy. So I'm asking them for advice. I'm turning them and saying, I'm reaching this sort of difficult place. What kind of suggestions would you have? What kind of counsel will you have? So that's when you say you're asking for help, right? And then if you've exhausted all those things, what you can do by yourself, what you can do in a fun kind of way, a neutral kind of way with friends, the advice that friends and other support and peers can give to you, or parents or siblings, then you turn to professionals. And too often, when we're talking about safety plan, this is where we start, right? We say, here's the numbers for suicide hotlines, here's my number, here's how you can contact the crisis intervention specialist, whatever we do. We don't go through all those preliminary steps. We don't help them identify when they're getting into trouble. We don't support what they can do by themselves. We don't support what they can do that's fun or enjoyable or pleasurable or just neutral, right? And pulls them out of that space with friends. We don't ask them who they turn to, who gives them good advice, who prevents them from doing things that harm them, and who encourages their security and safety. So this is, like you can see, towards the end of this safety plan creation, after we've laid the groundwork for all this. And then and only then is it helpful to reduce access to lethal means, especially firearm safety. And the reason for that is, think of it this way. If you had unbearable cancer and it was in the bone, which we know cancer in the bones is the most intense kind of pain that people have, and typically they're on morphine drips. And we said, morphine is addictive. We need to talk about taking away your morphine first. And then we'll talk about other ideas and solutions to help you with your pain. You can see why people would, right? So if we start with saying, I know you've thought about pills, and I know you've thought about using guns, and I know you've thought about when you're alone that you might want to hang or suffocate yourself. Well, I'm going to make sure that you agree that you're not going to do any of that. And now that you've agreed, maybe we can talk about how you'll feel better. So you want to go through all the rest of the safety plan first, where you say, look at all these resources that you have, your friends have, support have, all the professionals around, all the agencies that you can connect to, all that support that you can have. And now that you're feeling more confident about yourself, let's talk about taking things away from you within easy reach, so that if you do feel desperate, there's no gun there, you're supervised so that you can't go off alone and hang yourself or jump, or if you are tempted to drink a lot and get into a car and run, that your parents or your friends know to discourage you from drinking, not driving when you're drunk, etc. That's why you put it there. So this is the safety plan, and you're going to get the PDF of all this. So what I'm going to go through now is, with the limited time that we have, to talk about SBIRT and how you can use the SBIRT framework. So we've gone through, and you can see in my presentation, I go through a lot of the detail that I just went through you there, step by step. Warning signals on my own, and how to talk about reducing potential for use of lethal means. So we're going to run through that. The thing that I want to emphasize, though, is we always end our safety plan is the one thing that is most important to me and worth living for. So we always want to end with this sense of, now that we've had this discussion, what I've learned about myself is that what sustains me, what makes me question my desire to harm myself, is to look at what is the most important thing that keeps me going. I don't want to abandon my baby brother. I don't want to hurt my best friend. I'm the only one who takes care of the dog in the house. Who's going to take care of the dog if I leave this world? So we want to end with that because that underscores the motivation for following up on the safety plan. And that relates to their likelihood. We want to find out what motivates them to continue to do that. Here I talk to you about the My3 app, and you should definitely look that up. Now SBIRT, okay? So SBIRT is an acronym for Screening, Brief Intervention, and Referral to Treatment. So in this model, what we do is look at universal screening. So that means that everybody who walks into an office for anything, you go into a pediatrician for a sprained ankle, and they ask you about your exercise, your diet, your health. Here, if we're asking about suicide, that's routine. If we're asking about drug use, that's routine. As opposed to our traditional system where people get into dire straits before they're recognized and then they're referred. We want to early identify people and prevent things early or intervene early. So in this model, if routinely in schools, like in school-based health centers, we make an assessment, even if they're coming in for medical health care, about risky substance use, self-harmful behaviors, suicidality, then that's the public prevention issue. That's how the SBIRT framework fits in with suicide. The brief intervention is based in motivational interviewing to look at how to raise awareness of the problem that that person has identified for themselves. Raise the awareness, its consequences, and support their empowerment to make positive behavioral change. It's only 5, 10, 15 minutes, and there's structures for that. Brief negotiated interview is a commonly used one for adolescents of how to do that. And then the referral to treatment is really critical. The referral must be with this warm handoff. And a lot of you work in areas where we have community gatekeepers outside or inside the school, like natural helpers are community gatekeepers. We know a lot of effort has been spent looking at youth mental health first aid to get the general public aware of how to screen for people at risk, knowing that they're not counselors, that they're not providing therapy, but to help motivate people to seek the help that they need and to have some kind of awareness of what's out there to provide that kind of personal connection. So it's not just saying, here's the 800 number, or here's the number for New Mexico Crisis Access Line, NMCALS, call them. It's more that, well, you know, the school counselor is available, the school nurse is available to talk to you, this teacher is available to talk to you. If you're interested in following up, have you spoken about this with your pediatrician, whom you've told me that you like? You're making a personal connection with someone who you know will be able to further assess and manage and provide some kind of crisis intervention, if not longer term effectiveness. Brief therapy is 3 to 5 sessions that are focused. That's also part of the SBIRT process. So I'm saying to you is, if you look at, if we want to have a public health initiative to help people early in the process of becoming risky and self-endangering, we want to think about universal screening in our settings. We want to think about how to have some framework for motivating them to get the kind of care that would be helpful to them, and then making sure that people nearby, accessible by geography, by transportation, and certainly by funding, right? And don't have a long, long waiting list or have closed their practice, but they're open, they're accessible, that we can refer them to them with the confidence that they will actually be seen and be helped. So again, we're looking at universal pre-screening. And typically what we do is a very short screen, 1 or 2 questions, that leads to a longer full screen, like the 6-question Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale that I gave to you just now. There's many different screens for SBIRT for substance abuse. There's one particular screen for risky drinking in pregnant women, including young women who may be endangering their fetus. So there's all sorts of screening measures that you can select, and school-based health centers and school districts are well aware of what they typically use. The brief intervention, like I mentioned, that's to help saying, you know, you've identified for yourself, we've had this discussion, let's say with the Columbia screen, that you've thought about suicide, you've dealt with this before, you've planned things out, you're questioning that, you're hoping that you can come up with something else. We've identified together a number of reasons that you have to go on, reasons to live for. So based on that, do you think you're motivated to do something different this time? Meet with a counselor a couple of times? Enact a safety plan with your friends? This is what the brief intervention is about. And then that's where motivational interviewing, communicating empathy, compassion, acceptance, partnership. Again, respect for that person's agency and their autonomy. That's again, while we start with their identification of warning signals and what they can do all by themselves. Drawing out their ideas, motivations, and again, that ambivalence. You use open-ended questions, affirmations, reflection, and summaries. Talking about motivational interviewing in a very broad way, as you know, motivational interviewing was born in New Mexico. There's lots of trainings around that, including ones that me and my group and my colleagues at UNM offer. We're talking about change talk and a commitment to take action. SBIRT is steeped in motivational interviewing. So this is the basic framework, and again, incorporating peer and community supports. So remember that thing of doing something with a friend, asking a friend for advice. That's where we want peers to be involved. And some of the ways that we look at treating suicidality, one of the models that I really favor and train in, collaborative assessment and management of suicidality, directly involves a peer all throughout the process of the care. So more information about peer and peer supports and how to engage them and what they can provide. And I have some information for you on the collaborative assessment and management of youth suicidality. Again, we always want to end on a life worth living. That recovery is not the absence of negative symptoms, right, or problems. Recovery is positive, meaningful values, life worth living. So here's my contact information, and I think we'll stop the recording now, but if you would like to ask any questions, either through the chat or you'd like to be unmuted and talk now, I'd love to be available to you for another 5, 10, 15 minutes if you would like to take advantage of that time.